Well, we hadn't had any questions come in. I've got a few things to cover and go over, but before I go over those things, I think I'd open it up to the floor to ask any questions that you may have.
Hi, Vicky.
Hi, how you doing?
Do you have anything? You're usually a reliable source.
Well, after going to the conference in New Zealand, I haven't been out on site till tomorrow. I'm going out tomorrow.
The joys of it. And we're going to talk about the conference. I think it's good just to catch up for those that don't get the opportunity to go, to see that there are some things that happen that are really good. There's some things that happen that are questionable. It's interesting. So we will talk about the conference. It was in Christchurch, lovely little place. I say little, it is little. They have a river they call the Avon. And again, I use the word river very liberally. Perhaps a stream or a brook might be a little closer. It's not a big river by any stretch of the imagination. And it's a wonderful juxtaposition of really new architecture. It's all earthquake proof, and a few old buildings that managed to survive the earthquake. So in terms of the downtown part of the city. So it was a worthwhile trip. Did you think so, Vicky?
Yeah, I thought it was excellent. I really got a lot out of it.
And again, so there's the differences. I've been to quite a few conferences, and I looked at it and I thought it was fair. It wasn't one of those ones that you just thought, wow, that was a great talk, followed by, wow, that's a great talk, followed by that, wow, that's a great talk. But there was some really interesting stuff. So I'm going to share my screen. Anyone got a question before I start sharing?
I've got a question about root pruning.
Oh, yeah.
I used your allometric root calculator on a root mapping report for the first time, and yeah, I found it very useful. The client hasn't come back to me yet, but they're lucky that the percentage that came out on the root calculator was within the acceptable limit for what the roots were we found. But then I've got another job in a West Council where they're recommending roots to be pruned are no more than 20 millimetres. I suppose I wanted to know what your thoughts were on that, because that seems pretty small to me.
Incredibly small, and without any real substance at all. You might have gone to a talk. In fact, I'm pretty sure I saw you in there, by Andrew Benson at the conference. Did you get to see Andrew?
Yes.
So Andrew was talking about cutting some fairly big diameter roots in comparison, and he showed the amount of decay and the amount of regrowth. Interestingly, there was a lot of regrowth, fairly limited decay, certainly decay that wasn't going to affect the structural integrity of the root, at least based on the period that the experiment went over. But yeah, so he cut fairly big roots. In TreeNet, there's a lovely presentation by Mick Rogers, and you can look up Mick Rogers TreeNet. You can find his presentation, and he cut enormous roots right up to the trunk on Platanus. But my answer to it is, in that calculator, there's a second page, and you might not have realized that.
Yeah, I used both pages.
Yeah. So the second page says what size root, and I think it's unreasonable for a root of 5 or 10% not to be permissible to be cut. And again, depending on the trunk diameter, you probably found that a 2 centimeter root was a small fraction of the root biomass.
Yeah.
The other thing you'll note, and it's in the latest standard, is I think it's 3.3.4 again. Yeah, where it talks about, so 3.3.4, 3.5. There's nothing in the standard that talks about setting a size, but there is in the standard mentioning of the amount of biomass or the amount of root mass that is going to be removed. So root mass is the correct way to look at it, or at least proportion of root system. And 5 centimeters is incredibly small. So, you know, I've got photographs of roots that have been cut that are well over 0.5 meter. Now they're elliptical, but it still gives you an idea of what can and can't be done. So I'm dubious about roots of that sort of proportion.
Yeah, it seems like a standard,
Council's
like a
agreed to,
clause in the Inner West Council.
Yeah, look, I mean, I understand that their intent is to prevent injury from occurring to trees, but if you look at that second page, you can set what percentage you want to have for any one root. And, you know, if you set it to 2 to 5%, the chances are it'll still be bigger than 2 centimeters. And, you know, 2% of the root system in any one root is negligible, particularly given that the part of the root system that takes up water are ephemeral. Root hairs, the absorbing root is very ephemeral, and you know, 6 to 8 weeks and you've replaced it. So I don't understand why
council's free to set whatever conditions they like, you know, I mean,
Oh, yes.
it's their prerogative. But what would be interesting to know is why they set it at that level and where did they get their information from, Vicky? I think that's the thing. And they probably won't share it with you because it's probably just somebody's guess.
Yeah, it's a liver quiver.
Yeah. The other thing I was interested in is I would like to find a good journal article describing the regeneration of absorbing roots and the time frame it takes.
Oh, boy, that would be neat, but I don't know that you're going to have much luck.
Okay.
The
issue
answer is very quick.
Yep, sorry.
You go on. Continue,
You go,
Vicky.
Vicky.
The other issue I wanted to ask about in one of the courses I did is with the Italian presenters. I asked them about if you're severing roots on one side of the tree, does that have a direct relationship with the branches on that side of the tree? Because I've compressed roots by storing something on a tree in my garden, and the limbs directly above died. And I was wanting to know whether I could aerate and regenerate the absorbing roots on that side and then improve the health of the tree.
Okay, so I can answer that one a little easier, but not with any more precision. There may be a direct relationship between roots on one side of the tree and damage on one side of the tree. And it depends on how the water moves through the tree, and as a book, but still has.
Sorry, Mark, you're breaking up significantly. Could you just
can you hear me now?
run that again?
Yeah, there's a great a textbook by Kozlowski on water and trees, and he shows that there are a whole lot of different ways that the water might move through a tree. Very direct, as you've suggested, and you can follow it in a great way. And something like Pseudomonas syringae blight in the UK, you can see it going along the root, up the stem, and along branches. Direct correlation. Other trees it'll spread out, and there'll be very little correlation to no correlation. So, and that's something that we talked about when we talked about cutting roots right up to the trunk of the tree. You may end up actually getting a dead spot and eventually cavity if you cut directly the trunk, depending on the way that water is in the tree. there's no good textbook on that subject in terms of species by species or genus by genus. So the way you need to do it is to either observe, and the way to test is use the same test that Ted Koslowski used years ago, and that's you take some food colouring, you inject it into the root or the stem, and you watch how water moves. You can see how the colour is dispersed or not dispersed, spirals, whether it spreads out like a V, by then cutting through the tree and cutting it down. And there is no, as far as I know, there's no fixed answer on that. So it's going to be species by species basis. In terms of Ricky, very easy. Just add some organic material and water, and it'll start to remediate within a matter of weeks. Yeah, at its best, probably in 6 or 12 months. But I doubt that putting something on top of a root, unless you actually cause that root to die, and in other words, you had such a mass that the root could no longer divide and became necrotic on the top. I sincerely doubt there was a correlation, a causation. There's just a correlation. That is, yes, the roots had something stored on it, branches died, but they're not, the root having something stored on it doesn't necessarily cause the death of the branch. And the example I like to use of that is COVID-19. Lots of people with walking frames were dying. That does not mean that walking frames were killing people.
Well, I was storing vintage wrought iron that I was saving for a rainy day. And then when I saw what was happening to the tree, I moved it all off and I weighed it all, and it was 900 kilos.
Yeah, nothing. Because concrete weighs a lot more than that. So unless you see a portion of the root where cell division has no longer occurred, you'd have had minor impacts. Same with the amount of iron and other chemicals that would have been dissolved into the soil. It wouldn't be significant. Whilst iron is phytotoxic in high levels, the levels aren't that high. You know, zinc, for example, zinc from nice fencing. If you've got zinc over concrete, you've got algae growing, you'll see the algae will die where the corrugated, as well, sorry, where the chain link fence is, and it's dying because of just the small amount of zinc that's getting dissolved and deposited below. And imagining zinc doing that sort of damage to a big organism like a tree is, again, just inconceivable. You really have to start playing around with zinc salts in order to cause harm.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. And as I said, the regeneration of roots, I think most of you will have seen a presentation from me at some stage or other that shows you that we're able to regenerate the roots on a white sapote and a jacaranda and a Maria. Tested all three in about 6 weeks. So 6 weeks from the time that we started the treatment till there being an absolute full canopy. Now, for a full canopy to exist, we had to have a functional root system taking up water before the canopy started to burst, and canopy burst started at about 3 to 4 weeks. So summertime, so it'll be slower during winter. And if you're in a really cold climate, if you're at Tasmania and listening in, or the South Island of New Zealand and you're listening in, it's going to be cold. And by the way, Peter, just a shout out to the people I mentioned, a number of people that came up and said hi. We listened to the Arbor Mentor, or we watched Arbor Mentor, that are just coming in afterwards. And I thank those of you who came up and said g'day. Not that I'll remember any of you, but it was just nice to know that we had an impact beyond those that attend. So that was really great.
Yeah, it's interesting to get feedback. I'm aware that people do watch afterwards, but you don't really know how many. So it's great to get some feedback.
Yeah, and if you are listening in, you might want to just jot a note or an email to Peter and say, hey, I do listen in occasionally, or I listen to it after, that would be great. At least it lets Peter know whether he's wasting his effort or not.
I also had a couple of people that came up to me and said they'd watched the sessions, and one guy that was transferring from a climbing arborist to a consulting arborist said he was watching every video and taking notes, so
Yeah.
getting himself ready. Yeah.
So some good use. So some of the things that were interesting from the conference, and again, Vicky, I'll be glad to hear what you say. The issue of what things we need to worry about, strength loss and cavities was one of those things that did come up. And there was a real push to saying, look, tomographs are good, but they're not great. We lose information, and in particular, we lose information because tree stems aren't, the tomograph assumes that they're symmetrical, and they're not. They're irregular. So when you adjust the data by putting in exactly what's there, you get a different answer than if you put in what the tomograph assumes is a symmetric shape. So one of the things I took home from that talk was that, certainly in most cases, first of all, cavities don't fail. They tend to fail above or below. And even that is a fairly rare occurrence. And I think we've all observed that process. So it was good, just nice to hear something about that. Andrew Benson, as I mentioned, did a really interesting talk on root damage. And just to give you an idea, Peter, I think you'd recognise this sort of stuff. He looked at whether you should cut back to a node or cut back to a nodal point. And his work suggested that a non-nodal cut had its advantages and that it produced more growth. But he did rightfully point out that may be because a nodal cut diverts some of the energy to the remaining section of the roots. So it may not be sufficient. And of course, he's absolutely right. Insufficient information. But what it does show is that a nodal or a non-nodal cut really isn't an issue. We shouldn't be worrying about that. He also showed that autumn cutting of roots resulted in a little bit more decay. My view on that was, who cares? The amount of decay is negligible, and you almost never see a tree because somebody's cut a root, at a reasonable distance out, or cut a straight line at a reasonable distance out from a tree. At 3 times trunk diameter, you'll seldom see tree failure as a result of root cutting or decay. So it really is of little value in that regard. So that was worthwhile information that's been published. And if you're not aware, all the Journal of Arboriculture and Urban Forestry is public domain. It's made available to all of you. You can go and search it, and you can grab that information pretty well straight away. You got that one, didn't you, Vicky?
Yeah.
And that was good. Is there anything out of that I've left that you had as a takeaway from that?
Not really.
Yep, that's great. Next one was on girdling roots. I don't know whether you got to see that, but that was a great talk. Made it really plain and clear. Girdling roots are a problem. Washing off the soil wasn't highly effective. Air blasting it off was even less effective. But the method to deal was shaving off the outside. So if you've got girdling roots, go around the outside edge just with a sharp blade or a handsaw and just cut those outer roots off. And that makes a huge difference. If you're in the landscape industry,
so you're talking about potting stock, right?
Yeah, potted stock.
Not established trees.
No, sorry, yes. Potted material and not ground-grown material. Ground-grown material is less prone to these sort of problems. But pot-grown material is increasing still worldwide. And a part of the reason it increases, and I've made this comment before to those who've been in class with me, is the cost of real estate goes up. The mobility of the system needs to be there because the value of the land becomes higher. And in Sydney now, you won't find a 5-acre block, I can't imagine, for less than about $2.5 or $3 million. And so, you don't want things tied up for a long time in the ground. So pots are the way that things are done. Girdling roots are a common problem. In 1852, William Barron, in his wonderful book, The British Winter Garden, chapter 4, The Evils of Pot-Grown Culture, he picked up that it was a problem, and that was in terracotta pot day. Plastic pots, it's even worse. Yes, there are some good air printing techniques that reduce the problem, so air pots are a benefit, but the cost of them are higher, so shaving is something that you want to think about. If you are looking at planting a whole pile of larger material like this, it would be really good just to shave, repot, and give them just another 6 or 12 weeks before you planted them on. And that would give a chance for new roots to grow whilst it's still under heavy maintenance, rather than going into the ground and requiring heavy maintenance, just because heavy maintenance doesn't occur as regularly after planting occurs. It's a lot harder to control, whereas in a pot it's a little easier. So that was really good environmental work. Enough replicas so that shaving was good, and slicing down wasn't as good. Teasing out wasn't as good, at least in the mid to longer term. So that was a good talk. There was a great little talk on the Presidio. That's a park in San Francisco, looking at trees and the risk. And it was interesting seeing how many high-risk trees there were. And I know, Peter, you and I often talk about risk. I look at that number of trees in the tolerable and unacceptable range, being about one tree in every, I'll say 4,500 rather than 5, one tree in every 4,500. It's amazing that they had so many high-risk trees. I think this is the result of risk assessments that aren't quantified. It's nice to sort of clump things together and overdo the work, and it was a great example of exactly that happening. What they did say was that there was a lot greater agreement once they went to this high, medium, and low. People were a lot more satisfied because they understood what the terms mean. And the only thing I took away from that is I still don't know what high, medium, and low mean. I've got no idea. And research shows that that's exactly the case, that it's the ambiguity of it that we're comfortable with. That is, high is lower than moderate most of the time, and moderate is higher than low most of the time. But we don't actually know what that means in real terms. So when I start saying, how does it compare with a bed or chairs or all those other benchmarks you've seen me use over the years,
I recently read a study that was actually on risk or probability, and it was written by some people who are interested in gambling. But that aside, they looked at what these terms mean, but they didn't try and define them. What they did was ask a whole heap of people what they thought they meant, and those results were interesting. And of course, you got a bell curve of where people, and it was useful because it kind of does have a broad general correlation to what they actually mean. That's the closest I've ever seen to some sort of a definition of what those things mean.
It's got some meaning in that there is a relationship from low to medium to or moderate to high to extreme. There's no question there's that relationship, and we understand that that's a gradiated system. But what does that mean when it comes down to risk making? And Peter, we were talking earlier on today that traffic engineers get this. They'd never say, "Oh, the risk of an accident at this intersection was low." Well, they might, But if they were going to look at whether they're going to put a set of traffic lights in or some other traffic modifications, speed modifications, they want numbers.
They'll never say there was an accident here 3 years ago and we want to do something to make sure it never happens again.
And they'll never say there was a near miss here 3 days ago and another miss and another miss. So there's a pattern of misses. There's a pattern of failures here. But we do as tree people, we use that phrase far too regularly. So that was good seeing that perception, and it is very much perceptual. It's not in any way accurate. There was a great talk on phosphonates and phosphites, just looking at the difference between using these as fertilizers and using these as stimulants. But what we do know is that this group of chemicals stimulates the tree's natural defense system, and it's been particularly good in dealing with, in Australia, with Phytophthora cinnamomi. There's been some testing in other areas for other things, not so successful. And a part of that, I think you need to keep in mind that, and when I say Phytophthora, I also include Pythium, these water molds or oomycetes, are very weak pathogens in many ways. And so just improving the defense system of the host plant reduces the likelihood of having problems. So it was a good talk. And that was by Bartlett Labs, wonderful company in terms of research. They have a wonderful research facility in North Carolina, another one in the UK, and they do some really amazing work for the industry. It's something to be very proud of from their side. I think it's certainly so. You can see those of you who get the joys of things, same problems occur. Well, why'd I just couldn't find somewhere where I could get a half dress, half pair of pants. So I think that's funny to see the same problems worldwide occurring in terms of how to resolve or deal with things. The Botanic Gardens there is lovely. My favourite area was the fields, and that's because they're out in flower. I think it's just wonderful to see, mass plantings with lots of flowers like this going on. So enjoyed that particular area of the Botanic Gardens. Some amazing plants and bits and pieces. Lots of Sequoiadendron giganteums, and conifers are interesting things. They're great trees, but I wonder how we'd think about this problem here. Any thoughts? Am I still online?
So what exactly are we looking at, Mark?
A branch. We're looking at a branch of Sequoiadendron giganteum, and it's delaminating at the top here. It's been injured at the top.
How's it attached? How about the attachment? Is there something going on there?
Attachment might not be the best, but remember there's compression wood here all the way through here, and anatomical center is probably about here. And you'll see this all the time. Anytime, look at what's happening. It's injuries on the top side, and injuries. I suspect, Peter. I suspect this is where it from people getting on the branches. And this branch. If you look at the branch above, look how thin it is. Okay, very little adaptive growth. These are bigger because they've been injured on the top side. And when you see trees with the injuries on the top side of the branch close to the trunk, they put on more tissue on the underside, more prop tissue, support tissue is another word. It's ordinary wood, but a lot more of it. So again, our anatomical center is probably about where my arrow is there, and all of this extra is holding this up, or at least as far as it can. So it was great seeing some trees like that. It wasn't a Botanic Gardens that was overly manicured or anything else. It was a Botanic Gardens that understood that trees weren't perfect. Just want to try and find one for you. Day 2. So 2 days in the Botanic Gardens for me. It wasn't that big, but it was 2 half days with my wife. So some rod bracing, and Frank Rinn gave a great workshop on the first day I was there, and sung the virtues of rod bracing as opposed to cobras. Cobras are above, and explained why and how the system worked. This is Ganoderma, so this is a massive.
Would you like to expand on that briefly, Mark?
Yes and no. Most times the cobras are set with some degree of wanting things to get to attention, and that so it affects mass damping and affects the tree's responses. If there's a structural issue, then Frank's view was with the appropriate metal, so bolts is largely what he prefers, and there's some good merit to that process and thinking. So this is a Tilia cordata. Tilia cordatus malvaceus, so same family as Brachychiton or hibiscus. And this is, again, Ganoderma at the base, and you can see the dead roots right at the trunk. And so without any surprise that they have some concerns about it. Again, another Ganoderma, another bolt. And to give you some perspective, I'm pretty sure that's an M20, so a 20 millimeter diameter bolt. So it gives you an idea of the size of the tree. And that's the tree there. So that's what I first saw, and I thought, oh, how could you do that to a tree? And I know we talked about this the other day, Peter. The reason you could do that to a tree is to keep it going. The shame was that we ended up with these stubs, but these stubs seem to be where they put their cobra braces. And so I think they're hoping they'll be somewhat sacrificial, but I'm not sure the logic behind that. But, I know that in lots of places where I work, there'd be a push to want to get rid of that tree. Instead, they've said, look, let's cut it back hard. Let's put some hardware in there, and let's accept there are problems in the tree, and let's retain it. And I think that policy comes through in a lot of things that they do as a garden. And I'll just get you down again. That is a eucalyptus. So it gives you some idea. Eucalyptus delicatensis. That's not a bad sized tree, is it? So they're keen to try and do what they can. This one they've said goodbye to. This is a massive big pearl. Those are the base of it. Shame to see the tree go. But again, didn't go because of the burl. Great to see them leave the burl rather than cut it and market it. Sorry, association stuff. Let me kill that. So that's what I got out of the conference. Vicky, do you want to add anything that you went to that I didn't go to? Can you hear me?
You're on mute, Vicky. That's it.
Yes, I'm not being as experienced as others. I got quite a lot out of it. I thought the workshop with the Italian couple were really good because we spent a couple of hours out in the Botanic Gardens looking at the bracing and some of those issues with the trees.
Yep. And looking at the connectivity between the parts as well, I believe, from what I heard.
Yes. And I also found, is it Cameron Ryan that spoke about the standard and comparing this?
Yeah, Cameron Ryan.
Right, comparing the Australian standard to the American standard and the British standard. That helped clarify things a lot for me. So that was,
you can see that there are lots of similarities, not huge differences between things. Some unique differences, but not a lot.
yeah.
So I think that's good for us to see that we are headed in the right direction. I think we are anyhow. I think we're doing a good job of um, getting closer to the mark, and by no means a perfect step, but certainly an improvement where we were. It'll take time for people to get used to it, but they will eventually get used to it.
And it was interesting. I asked him about, I'm doing a job in Canberra at the moment to ask about the requirements in the ACT and the legislation and how it's different from New South Wales. So that was interesting for me.
It's interesting for me when the committee would meet, because Cameron is based in Victoria, and in Victoria they have a slightly or somewhat different process where they give consent to the development and then prepare a AIA based on what they've approved, and then prepare all the. Oh, sorry, they have an AIA done. Sorry, it's the tree protection specifications and the tree protection plan are prepared at that stage. So I find that really odd that it's not offered as part of the consent process. That is, here in New South Wales, we have to demonstrate at the lodgement stage that what's proposed will be working, not wait for it to be approved and then say, well, I think we can protect doing this, this, and this. But that's the way that both Victoria and Western Australia responded to their unique legislation. So
the other thing I wanted to ask about was the tomograph, and I think my take-home message from that was similar to what you stated before, that the cavities are different shapes and different sizes, but it made me wonder about a job I've done recently, and should the tomograph be also combined with the resistograph, because then from what I learned at the conference was that with the resistograph you can actually see where the wall is, the tree is sending up a wall to defend itself and close off the decay. Is
get
that
more
correct?
information
Yeah.
unquestionably from the two. And I'm pretty sure that's what Denise Johnson did, either a master's or a PhD on. And so you can go, there's a really good paper on the subject that looks at the data, and you get all sorts of errors, like a ring shake will give a huge error. That may not be the sinuses or the little, I think, yeah, my screen's still being shared. This is the sinus here between the buttress. Where do you put your sensors when you're running a tomograph? If you test here, or even if you put a resistograph through here, you may get little support, and out here you may get lots of good wood on the outside further apart. And Frank Rinn and somebody else described it as like the Eiffel Tower. There's lots of voids in the middle of the Eiffel Tower, but that doesn't mean it's going to fall over. And one of the things that is starting to become, I think, desirable is where we're using this sort of technology to test, and we're not dealing with stems that are somewhat symmetrical, somewhat rounded. Is LiDAR is now starting to become a really great mechanism for adding clarity in data. And LiDAR, for those of you who don't know, you can do it with your mobile phone. So we're getting better at being able to capture that information without having to have lots of expensive equipment. And in fact, there was a gentleman from the Czech Republic who no longer is in the Czech Republic, but he did some really great work on just how to interpret the information. Frank Rinn gave a great workshop on looking at, again, the same process of how to better assess the strength loss process. Allometry, and those of you know I do like a good mathematical elemental relationship, and so he has one that he considers. I think it could be reverse engineered to show the opposite. When do I need to consider? And that would be probably even more beneficial rather than having to check every time, is trying to figure out when you don't need to check. I'm a lazy person. So it'll be interesting to see where Frank goes with that. Any other questions or comments? It's a really short one, guys. For those of you who haven't been to a thing like this, there is an online ISA conference, I think, coming up in December. There are lots of online stuff done. You don't necessarily have to hop on a plane and have those expenses. When I was younger, that was the main way I got education in Australia. It just wasn't available freely. There was no Certificate 3 in arboriculture when I started. In fact, when I started, the course that I did was with the Pest Controllers Association of Australia, Phil Hadlington, and it was a massive 6-day course. So, anything beyond that meant either buying textbooks and hopping on planes to go to conferences. Of course, subscribing to the journal and reading the journal has been a great source of information. There are a number of really good journals. I was saying to someone the other day, they said, so what did you read? And I said, in the earlier days, Pre-Physiology, I subscribed to, and I subscribed to the journal. It wasn't called the Journal of Agriculture and Urban Forestry back then. I can't remember what it was called. But yes, there's certainly good stuff out there. The AA in the UK, Arboricultural Association, have a great journal. Unfortunately, it's not public domain, it's by subscription. So a little bit less beneficial unless you join up.